The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the emergency bay doors, a rhythmic drumming percussion that seemed to mock the sterile silence inside St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital. It was 3 in the morning, the hour when the city's heartbeat slows, when the adrenaline of the day fades into the exhaustion of the night, and when the shadows in the hallways seem to stretch just a little longer than they should. Inside Trauma Room 4, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the metallic tang of fear. A team of 6 medical professionals stood frozen, their eyes wide, their hands hovering uselessly over a patient who was slipping away before their very eyes. The monitors screamed a high-pitched, unyielding alarm, a digital death knell that echoed off the tiled walls. At the center of the chaos stood Dr. Marcus Thorne, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, a man whose reputation was built on arrogance as much as it was on skill. He was shouting orders, his voice cracking with a panic he refused to admit, his face flushed red under the harsh fluorescent lights. But no one was moving. No one knew what to do. The protocol had failed. The textbooks had offered no answer. And in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall with a calmness that bordered on eerie, stood Elena Vance. She was a nurse, just a nurse, or so they thought. She wore her scrubs slightly oversized, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun that hid her face, and her eyes were fixed not on the frantic doctor, but on the dying man on the table. She said nothing. She did not raise her hand. She did not step forward. She simply watched, her breathing steady, her pulse invisible, waiting for the moment when the noise would stop and the truth would have to begin. If you have ever felt invisible in a room full of people who refuse to see you, if you have ever been dismissed because of your title rather than judged by your capability, then you understand the weight of the silence that held Elena Vance in that moment. This story is not just about medicine. It is about the quiet dignity of those who serve in the shadows, and the explosive power of competence when it is finally allowed to speak. Before we dive into the depths of St. Jude's Metropolitan, take a second to hit that like button if you believe that respect should be earned by action, not assumed by status. It helps us bring these stories of hidden heroes to light. To understand why the room froze, you have to understand who Elena Vance was to the staff of St. Jude's. She was not new. She had been there for 3 years, a tenure that should have granted her some measure of respect. But in the hierarchical ecosystem of a major metropolitan trauma center, tenure means nothing without visibility. Elena was the ghost of the 3rd floor. She was the one who restocked the crash carts when everyone else was too busy complaining about their shifts. She was the one who stayed late to organize the supply closet, ensuring that every bandage, every IV line, every syringe was perfectly aligned. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her voice was so soft that doctors often asked her to repeat herself, not out of hearing difficulty, but out of a casual, ingrained disregard. She was 34 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hands that never shook. But to Dr. Thorne and his inner circle, she was furniture. She was part of the background noise of the hospital, a fixture as unnoticed and unvalued as the vending machine in the break room. They called her Quiet Nurse behind her back, a nickname that started as a descriptor and curdled into an insult. It implied emptiness. It implied a lack of intellect, a lack of drive, a lack of anything worth noticing. The culture at St. Jude's was toxic, though it wore the mask of excellence. It was a place where prestige was currency and humility was viewed as weakness. Dr. Marcus Thorne was the king of this castle. He was a brilliant surgeon, yes, but his brilliance was overshadowed by his need to be the smartest person in every room. He ruled through intimidation, belittling residents for minor errors and dismissing nurses' concerns with a wave of his hand. He believed that medicine was a hierarchy of gods and mortals, and he sat firmly on Olympus. Elena, with her silent efficiency and refusal to engage in the office politics that fueled Thorne's ego, was an anomaly he couldn't categorize. He didn't hate her. He simply didn't register her existence unless she was in his way. And when she was, he made sure she knew her place. There was the incident last winter when she had quietly corrected a dosage error in a pediatric chart. Thorne had stormed into the nurse's station, throwing the file on the desk, demanding to know who had dared to question his judgment. When Elena had stepped forward, calmly explaining the calculation, he had laughed. A cold, sharp laugh that silenced the room. "Stick to changing bedpans, Vance." He had sneered, "Leave the thinking to the doctors." The other nurses had looked down, ashamed but powerless. Elena had said nothing. She had picked up the file, corrected the error herself, and walked away. But in her eyes there had been a flicker of something dangerous, not anger, recognition. She recognized the fragility of his ego, and she knew that one day that fragility would break. We often forget that the people serving us coffee, cleaning our streets, or caring for our sick have entire lives, histories, and skills that remain hidden from our view. We judge books by their covers, and in doing so, we blind ourselves to the treasures within. If this resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, consider subscribing to our channel. We tell stories of the unseen, the unheard, and the undervalued, giving voice to those who let their actions speak louder than words. Your support helps us keep these narratives alive. Alina's past was a locked door, and she held the only key. Her colleagues knew nothing of her life before St. Jude's. They assumed she had come from a small community college, perhaps a local nursing program, struggling to make ends meet. They assumed her silence was shyness, her precision merely obsessive-compulsive tidiness. They were wrong. Alina Vance had not always been a nurse in a city hospital. 10 years ago, she had worn a different uniform. She had operated in environments where the stakes were not just life and death, but national security. She had been part of a specialized unit, a role that did not exist on any public roster, a job that required a blend of medical expertise and tactical precision that few humans possessed. She had been a combat medic, yes, but more than that, she had been a field operator for a joint task force that dealt with high-value assets in hostile territories. She had saved lives in mud-filled trenches under mortar fire. She had stabilized generals and spies alike, using nothing but her hands, her knowledge, and an iron will. But that life had ended abruptly, violently, and with a secrecy that had forced her to disappear. She had left behind a call sign, a reputation, and a body count of enemies neutralized not with bullets, but with survival. She had come to St. Jude's to hide, to find peace in the mundane, to heal her own wounds by healing others in a safe, sterile environment. She had vowed never to reveal herself, never to draw attention, never to let the ghost of her past haunt her present. But vows are fragile things, especially when faced with the reality of a dying man and an incompetent leader. The mystery breadcrumbs were there if anyone had cared to look. Alina's hands, for instance. They were scarred not from accidents but from specific types of trauma, shrapnel grazes, burn marks from flashbangs, calluses from holding weapons, and tourniquets with equal grip strength. She moved with an economy of motion that was unnatural for a civilian nurse. She didn't walk, she patrolled. She didn't just check vitals, she assessed threats. When a code blue was called, she didn't run, she advanced. These were subtle cues, microscopic deviations from the norm, but in a world blinded by prejudice, they went unseen. Dr. Thorne saw only a quiet woman who did her job without complaint. He didn't see the predator sleeping beneath the skin. He didn't see the woman who could disassemble a rifle in the dark or intubate a patient in a shaking helicopter. He saw only what he wanted to see, a subordinate, and that blindness would soon cost him everything. It was a Tuesday night when the first crack appeared in the facade. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had sent 4 critical patients to St. Jude's. The ER was chaotic, a symphony of screams and sirens. Alina was assigned to Trauma Bay 2, working alongside a junior resident named Dr. Aris. Aris was nervous, eager to please Thorne, and dangerously out of his depth. The patient in Bay 2 was a young man, barely 20, with severe internal bleeding and a collapsed lung. Aris was fumbling with the chest tube insertion, his hands shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. Alina watched him, her eyes tracking the angle of the needle, the tension in the patient's neck veins. She saw the mistake before it happened. Aris was aiming too low, risking damage to the liver. She stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "Angle up, doctor, 3 degrees, you're hitting the diaphragm." Aris snapped at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "I know what I'm doing, Vance, back off." He pushed harder, the monitor spiked. Blood began to pool in the suction canister faster than it should. Alina didn't argue, she didn't report him. She simply reached out, her hand covering his, and guided the trocar with a precision that was instantaneous and undeniable. The tube slid in, the lung expanded, the vitals stabilized. Aris pulled his hand away as if burned, staring at her with a mix of confusion and resentment. He didn't thank he muttered something about luck and turned away. But Alina had seen the look in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was fear. Fear that she knew more than him, fear that she was better than him, and in the world of St. Jude's, that was a sin. Have you ever had to correct someone in power, knowing that your help would be resented rather than appreciated? It's a delicate balance, walking the line between duty and self-preservation. If you've ever been in that position, leave a comment below telling us how you handled it. We read every story, and your experiences help shape the conversations we have here. The incident in Bay 2 should have been a wake-up call. It should have signaled to Thorne and his cadre that Alina Vance was not ordinary, but instead it fueled their disdain. Aris reported her to Thorne, framing her intervention as insubordination, as undermining his authority. Thorne summoned Alina to his office later that week. The office was large, cluttered with awards and framed degrees, a shrine to his own ego. He didn't look up when she entered. He kept writing, letting the silence stretch, a power play designed to make her uncomfortable. Alina stood still, her posture perfect, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Finally, Thorne set down his pen. "Nurse Vance," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I hear you have opinions on surgical procedure." Alina met his gaze. "I observed a potential complication, doctor. I acted to prevent patient harm." Thorne smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "Your job is to assist, not to diagnose. Your job is to follow orders, not to give them. If I catch you touching a doctor's instruments again without explicit permission, I will have your badge. Do we understand each other?" Alina nodded once. "Understood, doctor." She turned and left, her face a mask of neutrality. But inside, the ice was forming. She knew that Thorne was not just arrogant, he was dangerous. His incompetence was masked by his rank, and his insecurity made him vindictive. She knew that sooner or later, his hubris would lead to a catastrophe. And when it did, she would have to choose between her vow of silence and her oath to save lives. The weeks that followed were tense. Alina withdrew further into herself, becoming even more invisible. She did her work flawlessly, anticipating needs before they were voiced, ensuring that every tool was ready, every medication prepared. But she stopped offering advice. She stopped making eye contact. She became a shadow, moving through the halls with a grace that went unnoticed. The other nurses noticed the change. They saw the way Thorne's eyes tracked her, looking for an excuse to fire her. They saw the way Aris avoided her, ashamed of his own inadequacy but unwilling to admit it. The atmosphere in the ER grew heavier, charged with an unspoken anxiety. Everyone knew that Thorne was looking for a scapegoat, and everyone knew that Alina was the easiest target, but no one spoke up. No one dared. The hierarchy was too rigid, the fear too palpable. Alina accepted this. She had survived worse than office politics. She had survived war. She could survive this, or so she thought. Then came the night of the storm. The rain was torrential, flooding the streets, slowing ambulances to a crawl. The ER was understaffed, 2 nurses calling in sick, a resident quitting mid-shift. Thorne was in a foul mood, drinking too much coffee, snapping at anyone who crossed his path. It was then that the radio crackled. "Code Black, incoming, VIP transport, ETA 2 minutes. The room went silent. Code Black meant a high-profile patient, someone with political or military significance. It meant pressure, it meant scrutiny. Thorne straightened his coat, his eyes gleaming with the opportunity for glory. "Clear Trauma 1, he barked. "Get the best equipment ready, I want this perfect." Alina was assigned to Trauma 1. She checked the defibrillator, the intubation kit, the blood bank supplies. Her movements were automatic, efficient, but her instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. The radio transmission had been vague, but the tone of the dispatcher's voice had been urgent, terrified. This wasn't just a VIP, this was a crisis. If you are enjoying the tension building in this story, if you are feeling the weight of Alina's isolation, please consider sharing this video with a friend who appreciates a well-told tale of justice. Sharing helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages of resilience and integrity. The ambulance doors burst open and the stretcher was wheeled in, surrounded by a phalanx of security guards in dark suits. They pushed past the nurses, blocking access, their faces grim. On the stretcher lay a man in his 50s, dressed in a tactical vest over a blood-soaked shirt. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. But it was his eyes that caught Alina's attention. They were open, focused, and filled with a fierce, burning intelligence. He was conscious, and he was looking at her. Not at Thorne, who was rushing forward with a pompous greeting. Not at the security guards, at her. Alina froze. She knew those eyes. She had seen them in the desert, in the mountains, in the darkest corners of the world. She knew the man on the table. Commander Silas Vane, Navy SEAL, legend. Her former commanding officer, the man who had saved her life and whom she had sworn to protect with her own. The man whose call sign was whispered in the halls of power, Ghost. Thorne pushed past Alina, shoving her aside with his elbow. "Move, Vance," he snapped. He looked at the patient, his eyes widening as he recognized the face from the news. "Commander Vane," he said, his voice shifting to a sycophantic purr. "Sir, I am Dr. Thorne, Chief of Emergency Medicine. We are honored to have you here. We will take excellent care of you." Vane didn't respond to Thorne. He kept his eyes locked on Alina. His lips moved, forming a single word, silent but clear. "Vance." Thorne frowned, looking back at Alina. "Do you know this man, nurse?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Alina hesitated. To acknowledge Vane was to break her cover, to reveal her past. But to ignore him was to betray him. She looked at Thorne, then back at Vane. I have seen him on television, doctor," she lied, her voice steady. Thorne scoffed. "Right, well, stay out of the way. This is beyond your pay grade." He turned back to Vane, beginning his examination. But Vane was deteriorating rapidly. His blood pressure was dropping, his heart rate was spiking. Thorne was distracted, more concerned with impressing the security detail than treating the patient. He ordered a CT scan, ignoring the signs of internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. "We need to know the extent of the injury," Thorne declared. "Prep him for radiology." Alina stepped forward. "Doctor," she said, her voice louder than usual. "He's unstable. Transport to radiology could kill him. He needs a thoracotomy now." Thorne spun around, his face purple with rage. "Who gave you permission to speak?" he shouted. "I am the doctor here. You are a nurse. You do not diagnose. You do not prescribe. You stand there and you shut up." The security guards looked on, impassive. The other staff members looked down, terrified. Vane's eyes were closing. His breathing was shallow. Alina looked at the monitor. She looked at Thorne, and she made her choice. She couldn't let him die, not like this, not because of pride. This is the moment where everything changes. The moment where the quiet nurse steps into the light. If you are on the edge of your seat, if you are wondering what Alina will do next, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the climax of this story. We have more tales of hidden heroes coming your way, and you won't want to miss them. Alina moved. It wasn't a run, it was a blur. She grabbed the scalpel from the tray. She pushed past Thorne, who was too shocked to react. She sliced through the tape securing Vane's vest. She placed her hands on his chest, finding the landmark between the ribs with a precision that was muscle memory. "Hold him down," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned the room. The security guards, trained to recognize command presence, instinctively obeyed. They pinned Vane's shoulders. Alina didn't hesitate. She made the incision clean, deep, fast. She spread the ribs with her fingers, reaching into the chest cavity. She found the bleeding vessel. She clamped it. The monitor beeped, the rhythm stabilizing. The room was silent, save for the sound of Alina's breathing and the hum of the machines. Thorne stood frozen, his mouth open, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He had been usurped, in his own trauma room, by a nurse. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then Thorne found his voice. "What have you done?" he shrieked. "You assaulted a patient. You performed unauthorized surgery. Security, arrest her." The guards hesitated. They looked at Vane, whose color was returning, whose eyes were open again, watching Alina with a mixture of pain and pride. They looked at Thorne, who was foaming at the mouth. And they looked at Alina, who stood covered in blood, her hands still inside the chest of the most dangerous man in the room, her face calm, her eyes cold. "I saved his life," she said simply. "And if you interrupt me again, he will die." The sheer audacity of her statement, the absolute confidence in her voice, paralyzed Thorne. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't call security on a woman who was currently keeping a VIP alive. He fumed, pacing, muttering threats, but he stayed back. Alina worked for another 5 minutes, suturing the vessel, checking for other injuries. When she was finished, she stepped back. "He's stable," she said. "Now you can take him to radiology." She stripped off her gloves, dropping them into the bin. She looked at Thorne. "You're welcome." "Doctor." The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Thorne did not thank her. He did not acknowledge her skill. He saw only the insult to his authority. He waited until Vane was wheeled out, surrounded by his security detail, before he turned on Alina. "You are fired," he spat. "Pack your things. Get out of my hospital. I will make sure you never work in medicine again. I will blacklist you. I will destroy you." Alina nodded. She had expected this. She had known that saving Vane would cost her her job. But she had also known that it was the right thing to do. She walked to the locker room, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline had faded. She packed her bag, her movements slow, deliberate. The other nurses watched her, some with pity, some with admiration, but none with the courage to speak up. Alina didn't blame them. She understood the system. She had lived in systems like this before. She took her badge, her ID, her personal items. She left her scrubs in the bin. She walked out of the hospital, into the rain, alone. But the story was not over, far from it. Because while Alina was walking home in the rain, thinking about her future, thinking about how she would survive, a phone was ringing in a secure facility hundreds of miles away. A phone that only rang for emergencies. A phone that belonged to Admiral James Sterling, the head of Naval Special Warfare Command. And on the other end of the line was Commander Silas Vane, weak but alive, speaking with a clarity that cut through the static. "Sterling," Vane said. "I need you to find someone. Her name is Alina Vance. She goes by Spectre in the archives. Find her now." The injustice of Alina's firing rippled through the hospital staff. Whispers circulated in the break rooms. People talked about what they had seen, about how Thorne had panicked, about how Alina had acted with a skill that none of them had ever seen. But fear kept them silent. Thorne had made it clear that anyone who supported Alina would face similar consequences, so the hospital returned to its normal rhythm. Thorne strutted through the halls, boasting about how he had handled the VIP situation, omitting the part where a nurse had saved the day. He painted himself as the hero, the one who had overseen the successful treatment of Commander Vane. He was oblivious to the fact that Vane remembered everything. He was oblivious to the fact that Vane was not a man who forgot debts. 2 days later, Alina was sitting in her small apartment, staring at her resume, wondering where to apply next. She had no references. Thorne had ensured that. She was tired, she was broke, she was alone. There was a knock at the door, not a polite knock, an authoritative rap. Alina opened the door to find 2 men in suits standing in the hallway. They didn't look like police, they looked like government. "Ms. Vance?" one of them asked. "Yes," she replied, her heart pounding. "We are here to escort you." "Please come with us." "Where?" she asked. "You'll see," the man said. He didn't offer handcuffs, he offered respect. Alina grabbed her jacket. She didn't ask questions. She knew who they were, or at least she suspected. She followed them to a black SUV parked outside. They drove in silence through the city onto the highway towards the naval base on the coast. Alina looked out the window, watching the rain streak the glass. She felt a strange sense of calm. The wait was over. If you are feeling the satisfaction of seeing the tide turn, if you are eager to see Thorne get his comeuppance, hit that like button. It's a small gesture, but it tells us that you value justice being served in these stories. The naval base was a fortress of steel and concrete, imposing and stark. Alina was led through a series of checkpoints, her identity verified at every step. She was taken to a high-security conference room, a space that smelled of leather and old money. Sitting at the head of the table was Admiral Sterling. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much war. Standing next to him, leaning on a cane but upright and strong, was Commander Silas Vane. Alina stopped in the doorway. She hadn't seen Vane since that night in the ER. He looked better, though still pale. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Spectre," he said, "it's good to see you." Alina felt a lump in her throat. "Commander," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Admiral," Vane said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Alina, we have a lot to discuss." Alina sat. She kept her back straight, her hands in her lap. She was back in the fold, but this time it was different. This time she was not a soldier, she was a witness. "Dr. Thorne fired you," Sterling said, his voice gravelly, "for performing life-saving surgery on a Navy SEAL." Alina nodded. "Yes, Admiral. And he claims he managed the case," Vane added, his voice hardening. "He claims he was in control." Alina looked at Vane. "He wasn't, sir. He was going to send you." "Radiology, you would have bled out in the elevator." Vane nodded. "I know, I remember. I also remember that you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask for permission. You just acted. That's why you were Spectre. That's why you were the best." Sterling leaned forward. "Alina, we cannot reinstate you at St. Jude's. That is a civilian matter, but we can ensure that the truth is known, and we can ensure that Dr. Thorne faces the consequences of his negligence and his falsehoods." Alina looked at them. "What do you need me to do?" Sterling smiled. "We need you to testify, not in a court of law, but in a boardroom. The hospital board is meeting tomorrow. Dr. Thorne is up for a prestigious national award. We are going to crash that party." The next day, the grand ballroom of St. Jude's Hospital was filled with the elite of the medical community. Doctors, administrators, donors, and press mingled, drinking champagne and congratulating themselves on their benevolence. Dr. Thorne was at the center of it all, holding court, laughing loudly, accepting praise for his heroic handling of the VIP case. He was wearing his best suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his ego inflated to bursting. He was about to receive the Excellence in Emergency Care Award, a trophy that would cement his legacy. He raised his glass for a toast, beginning a speech about leadership, about decisiveness, about the burden of command. And then the doors at the back of the room opened. Silence fell over the room, not the polite silence of attention, but the shocked silence of intrusion. Admiral Sterling walked in, flanked by Commander Vane and Alina Vance. Sterling was in full dress uniform, medals gleaming. Vane was in his service dress, his cane tapping softly on the floor. Alina was in a simple black dress, her head held high, her eyes fixed on Thorne. The crowd parted, confused, intimidated by the sudden presence of military authority. Thorne's smile faltered. He lowered his glass. "What is the meaning of this?" he stammered. Sterling didn't answer him. He walked to the microphone, taking it from the stunned MC. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice booming through the speakers. "I am Admiral James Sterling, United States Navy. I am here to correct a record." Thorne's face went white. He tried to step forward, but Vane blocked his path, his presence imposing, his eyes cold. "Stay back, Doctor," Vane said quietly. Thorne froze. Sterling continued. 3 nights ago, Commander Silas Vane was brought to this hospital with a gunshot wound to the chest. He was dying. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Thorne, failed to recognize the severity of the injury. He attempted to transport an unstable patient to radiology, a decision that would have resulted in Commander Vane's death. A gasp went through the room. Thorne shook his head, mouthing no, no, no. However, Sterling continued, a nurse on duty, Ms. Alina Vance, recognized the error. She intervened. She performed an emergency thoracotomy, stabilizing the commander and saving his life. She did so despite being threatened with termination by Dr. Thorne. She did so despite having no authority to do so. She acted with the skill, courage, and integrity that defines the highest standards of medical care, standards that Dr. Thorne clearly lacks. The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Thorne. The donors looked horrified. The doctors looked ashamed. The press cameras flashed, capturing Thorne's crumbling composure. Sterling turned to Alina. Ms. Vance, would you like to say anything? Alina stepped forward. She looked at Thorne. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She spoke softly, but her voice carried. I did what I was trained to do, she said. I saved a life, that is all. Then she looked at the board members. Dr. Thorne fired me for saving a patient. He lied about his role in the treatment. He prioritized his ego over human life. I leave it to you to decide if that is the kind of leadership you want to reward. She stepped back. Sterling nodded. Commander Vane has filed a formal complaint with the State Medical Board. We have provided video evidence from the trauma room security cameras, which Dr. Thorne attempted to delete but failed. The investigation is ongoing. But let this be clear, the Navy does not forget, and neither do we. Thorne tried to speak to defend himself, but no one listened. The board chairman, a stern woman named Dr. Evans, stood up. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice icy, please surrender your badge. You are suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, and I suspect the outcome will be permanent revocation of your privileges. Thorne looked around the room, begging for support, for sympathy. But he found only judgment. He had been exposed. His mask had been ripped away. He was not a god. He was a fraud, and he had been defeated by the person he had deemed insignificant. He slumped, defeated, and walked out of the room, the applause of the crowd replaced by the sound of his own shame. This is the moment of vindication, the moment where the truth triumphs over lies. If you felt a surge of satisfaction seeing Thorne fall, let us know in the comments. What was your favorite part of the confrontation? We love hearing your thoughts on these pivotal moments. The aftermath was swift. Thorne was stripped of his chief position. His medical license was under review. The hospital issued a public apology to Alina, offering her job back with a promotion and a significant raise. But Alina declined. She didn't want to stay at St. Jude's. The culture was still toxic, and she had outgrown it. Instead, she accepted a position offered by Admiral Sterling. She was hired as a senior medical consultant for the Naval Special Warfare Command, a role that allowed her to use her skills in a way that mattered in a place where she was respected. She left the city hospital behind, not with bitterness, but with relief. She had proven herself, not to Thorne, not to the board, but to herself. In the weeks that followed, the story of the quiet nurse spread. It became a legend in the medical community, a cautionary tale about arrogance and a testament to the power of humility. Nurses everywhere felt a surge of pride. They saw themselves in Alina. They saw the value of their own unseen labor. Alina became a symbol not of rebellion, but of integrity. She didn't seek fame. She didn't write a book. She didn't give interviews. She simply went to work, saving lives, training medics, and living with the quiet dignity that had always defined her. But she was no longer invisible. She was seen, and that was enough. 1 month later, Alina received a package in the mail. It was from Commander Vane. Inside was a small metal pin. It was the insignia of the SEALs, but with a special modification. On the back, it was engraved with a single word, Spectre, and a note, Welcome home, sister, you never left, Silas. Alina pinned it to her jacket. She looked in the mirror. She saw the scars on her hands. She saw the strength in her eyes. She smiled. For the first time in 10 years, she felt whole. The story of Alina Vance reminds us that competence is not always loud. That heroism is not always celebrated in the moment. That sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who say the least. We live in a world that values noise over substance, status over skill. But true authority comes from action, from integrity, from the willingness to do what is right even when it costs you everything. Alina paid that price. And she was rewarded not with money or fame, but with respect, with belonging, with peace. As we conclude this story, take a moment to reflect on the people in your own life who may be underestimated. The quiet colleague, the shy neighbor, the reserved friend, they may have depths you cannot imagine. They may have stories that would surprise you. Take the time to listen, to see, to value, because you never know when the quietest person in the room might become your lifeline. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, please consider subscribing to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you narratives that challenge perceptions and celebrate the human spirit. Your subscription ensures that we can continue to produce high-quality, thoughtful content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community. We also encourage you to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth. In a world that often tries to diminish us, stories like Alina's serve as a beacon of hope. They remind us that truth eventually prevails, that justice, though delayed, is never denied. Share this message of resilience. Share it with pride. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed an act of quiet heroism? Have you ever been the one to step up when others hesitated? Leave your stories in the comments below. We read every single one, and your voices add depth and richness to our community. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for spending this hour with us. Thank you for listening to Alina's story. May you find the courage to be your authentic self, even when the world demands you be something else. May you find the strength to stand firm in your integrity, even when it is difficult. And may you always remember that you are seen, you are valued, and you are capable of greatness. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep whispering your truth even if no one is listening, because eventually the right people will hear you, and they will answer. This has been a production of the Code Whisperers, written by our senior narrative team, narrated for your immersion, designed to inspire. We hope you enjoyed the journey. Remember, the next time you walk into a hospital or a school or an office, look beyond the titles. Look beyond the uniforms. Look for the humanity. Look for the hidden strengths. You might just find a heroes standing in the shadows, waiting for their moment to shine. We will be back next week with another story of injustice and redemption. Another tale of the underdog rising. Another chance to believe in the power of good. Don't miss it. Set your reminders. Turn on your notifications. Be the first to know. As the screen fades to black, imagine Alina standing on the deck of a naval ship, the wind in her hair, the ocean stretching out before her. She is not hiding anymore. She is not running. She is home, and she is ready.